Misery in Moscow, but was there a breakthrough in Berlin? World leaders agreed to end foreign interference in Libya and uphold an arms embargo. Are these the first steps towards ending almost a decade of conflict? I'm Erdogan, and today's newsmaker is the push for peace in Libya. We have to make sure Libya doesn't become a second Syria. That was the warning from Germany's foreign minister as 12 world leaders gathered in Berlin on Sunday to talk peace. Many attempts have been made to end the war, but none have been successful. So what's the answer? Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel claims there's no military solution to the conflict, only a political one will work. But Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan made it clear that unless warlord Khalifa Haftar ends his assault on Tripoli, that won't be possible. The Berlin summit came to a close with leaders from the European Union, Russia, and Turkey agreeing to uphold a United Nations arms embargo and to end foreign intervention in Libya's war. But will it make any difference? And if not, what can? That debate in just a moment, but first, Natalie Pohonen has this report.
Sunday's summit in Berlin was a fresh attempt by world powers to reach a ceasefire in the Libyan conflict. Even before it began, expectations were muted. If ever there was an indication of just how far there is to go in mediating the crisis, the family photo is it. As leaders gathered, there was no sign of the men who lead the two factions actually fighting for control in Libya. Both Fayez al-Sarraj, who heads the UN-backed government of national accord, and warlord Khalifa Haftar, who controls the self-styled LNA militia, were there. But as German Chancellor Angela Merkel put it, the differences between them are so great, they're not speaking to each other. Yet there were signs of progress. All of the foreign powers in attendance have committed to refraining from interference in the armed conflict or in the internal affairs of Libya and urge all international actors to do the same. And they've reiterated the need for a political solution.
Dieses Waffenembargo respektieren wollen und dass das Waffenembargo auch stärker kontrolliert wird, als das in der Vergangenheit der Fall ist. Denn sonst werden wir sehen, dass diese militärische Lösung doch immer wieder nicht ausscheidet, sondern dass immer wieder da Versuche gemacht werden.
While there's no ceasefire yet, it remains the goal.
We have a truce. And one central question is that all the participants today committed to support the ceasefire and committed to put pressure on the parties to the conflict for a full ceasefire to be reached.
Since the toppling of dictator Muammar Gaddafi in 2011, Libya has been in a state of conflict. Finding a lasting solution remains complex, not least because of the number of international actors involved. Sarraj and his internationally recognized government in Tripoli have received support from countries including Turkey, Qatar, and Italy. Haftar has received tacit backing from Russia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, France, Saudi Arabia, and the US. He sent a message to both Sarraj and attendees in Berlin that he remains a formidable player. His forces stopped oil shipments from ports under LNA control in central and eastern Libya on Saturday. That cut almost half of the country's daily crude export. Then on Sunday, forces loyal to Haftar closed an export pipeline in the southwest, a display of the power he has to control this vital economic lifeline. The Berlin gathering was an attempt to bring about a political solution. But how realistic is it that peace can be delivered when there are so many actors with vested interests in Libya? Natalie Pohonen, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined here in the studio by Jamal Ghamari. He's the special envoy for Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj. In Washington, D.C. is Jonathan Weiner. He was the U.S. special envoy for Libya. Mohamed Eljarh is in Riyadh. He's a Libyan affairs analyst and the founder of Libya Outlook. And in London is Marco Carnelos. He was former Italian Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's advisor on Libya. Gentlemen, welcome to all of you. Jonathan Weiner, let me begin with you. After 4 hours of talks, the message that was given by Angela Merkel and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres was that everyone needs to take extra steps towards peace and stability. Do you think the talks were a success?
Well, the internationals who've been most involved in violating Libya's sovereignty and interfering in its internal affairs and supporting the war were all present. People who provided weapons in violation of the arms embargo were present. They've all committed to stop doing what they've been doing over the past number of months. If they actually stop, that would make a very big difference.
Okay. Mohamed Eljarh, let me begin with you. Continue with you. What specific criteria will you be looking at? Is it how quickly the committees are formed? Is it the reduction in the violence? Or is it how much pressure that these international partners are going to be putting on the both sides? What is success according to you?
I think I would use three criteria, and possibly I am lowering the expectations here, but these are very important for us to make any progress in Libya. And the first would be to ensure that we manage to transform this truce into a lasting ceasefire in Tripoli and in other parts where there is conflict. This is critically important, and this will depend on how quickly the Berlin process manages to bring together the 5+5 committee, which has 5 representatives for both of the conflict parties, and to get them this week or in the next few days to actually agree on the terms and on the specific and the details of a ceasefire. Because without a ceasefire agreement, it will be difficult to work on a host of other issues that will be important. The other criteria that I would think about is to actually see a hold or a temporary pause on the supply of mercenaries and weapons to both sides of the conflict in Libya. And the other criteria for me is to actually immediately activate the international follow-up committee that was agreed in Berlin, and to make sure that it is actually put in place and put to effective use so that it becomes an actual forum for intervening external actors, but also for international actors that are involved in Libya, because that has been missing from the Libyan scene for quite some time.
Jamal Ghamati, listening to Mohamed, it sounds like a lot of ifs. I mean, Khalifa Haftar doesn't always have the best track record in terms of keeping up his end of the bargain. I'm going to ask you a question that's been asked many times before. Can Khalifa Haftar be trusted?
Well, based on his track record, absolutely not. And I think what happened yesterday in Berlin was not a breakthrough. It is more of the same. We had the same thing in Palermo, in Paris. We had a very detailed statement at the end, 56 points. Some of them are just copy and paste from previous statements. There was no agreement to a ceasefire. Haftar did not sign any ceasefire agreement, whereas al-Sarraj did in Moscow. And today, the New York Times tells us, according to their sources, that actually Haftar was ordered by the Emiratis not to sign any ceasefire document whatsoever. Last night, there was a violation of the truce in Tripoli. Haftar forces opened fire in at least 3 places.
Okay,
and just one more thing. Today, aviation monitors tell us that they have spotted 2 cargo planes, Illusion planes, fly from Abu Dhabi to Benghazi just today. We assume that they're bringing something that Haftar needs. I don't think they would be bringing any rice or wheat flour, so we can guess what they're bringing.
Okay.
So that puts an end to any end of supplying weapons or arms to the sites.
Okay. Mohamed, Jamal said this was a copy and paste, but where we are right now with this process being carried over to, let's say, the United Nations with greater enthusiasm, do you think the Emiratis, the French, the Russians are going to try to keep their side, the leader of the LNA, Khalifa Haftar, perhaps on a shorter leash, under a closer microscope?
I am skeptical in this regard. I don't think countries like Russia and Turkey will easily give up their newly found influence in Libya. They will be looking to make sure that they secure whatever influence and interest that they have managed to now have in Libya on the 2 conflict parties. For example, we have seen Moscow already hinting that they will actually possibly veto or oppose or water down any attempt to go to the UN Security Council because they do have an issue with the idea, for example, of having a monitoring mechanism or a peacekeeping force in Libya that would actually oversee or monitor the ceasefire and monitor the arms embargo or the implementation of the arms embargo. On the other side, I think the UAE and Egypt, for example, have invested way too much and for years in order to have Khalifa Haftar completely capture the country and rule there and ensure that political Islam groups that dominate the government of national accord are no longer in power. So both sides or these intervening countries actually do not really have an incentive of stopping the conflict. It's better for them maybe to see the status quo actually continuing.
All right, Marco, let me bring you into the conversation. Turkey and Russia were interested in stopping the conflict, were they not? Now the Europeans seems like they have the reins in their hands with this summit. Did they feel threatened, do you think, that they feel that they need to act right now and sideline sort of Turkey and Russia with them signing or coming to an agreement with the ceasefire, or Turkey signing these two agreements with the Libyan National Accord government?
Well, actually, if you go and see how much has changed in less than 10 years on this dossier is quite amazing. Roughly 10 years ago, we had a process led by France and UK, led from behind from the United States. Now we have a Russia-Turkey-led process, and as far as we can see, the Americans are only watching this time from behind. We have to recognize one fact. We have the Berlin conference yesterday simply because Turkey at a certain point applied some pressure, threatening to send troops there. And I think this has been one of the major factors that decided and pushed all the international community to convene in Berlin. Unfortunately, the family picture, the official photo yesterday, is a plastic representation of how much we are far away from at the beginning of a process. I believe looking at the simple fact that two major warring partners were not in the picture may mean that the Berlin conference has been a little bit overambitious. And in fact, either Chancellor Merkel, Secretary General Guterres, even Foreign Minister Lavrov, they put a lot of cold water on the process. It's just a truce. From the truce, we have to go to the ceasefire, and it's only after a held ceasefire we can start a reasonable and meaningful political process.
Mohamed Eljarh, when Merkel asked how the meetings were conducted, she had to admit that neither side met face-to-face, and that's the point that Marco made. Doesn't this seem to be awfully worrying that when you have countries trying to push Libya towards a path of peace, that the two warring sides can't even sit down at the same table together?
Well, there is an ongoing conflict, and I think it's a start. If we manage to succeed to actually get the 5+5 committee to actually meet, which are 5 representatives from Khalifa Haftar's side and 5 representatives from Sarraj's side, that will be a start. We can then start to work on trust-building measures in this regard. But again, this will have to come with a lot of pressure from the outside. It's important for this process to change the intensive external interference in the Libyan affairs into extensive external pressure on Libyan conflict parties to actually sit at the table. So I do not expect Khalifa Haftar and Sarraj to meet anytime soon. But I think it will be very important to have representatives from these two sides to actually meet and start to set or lay the ground for a potential meeting between the two sides in the future. So we have a conflict going on, and we have thousands of fighters on both sides that have been killed and injured. So it will be difficult for the two leaders in their respective constituencies and bases to actually just go and meet and have a photo op and shake hands. It's very difficult for that to happen when we have a conflict that is that has been raging, and we even have a truce that has been violated on a number of times. During the meeting between these world leaders, there has been a violation of the truce in southern Tripoli.
Jonathan Weiner, Mohamed said that there needs to be pressure from the outside. Mark also said that the United States was watching from one step behind. Why do you think the United States has been visibly absent in all this?
Well, President Trump got elected in part by harping on the deaths of Americans in Benghazi under Hillary Clinton. And I think it's pretty clear he doesn't want to commit his political future to Libya. I don't see that changing during his first term in office. I think that the United States can help quietly. Our career diplomats are excellent, and the United States will support the UN process, will support efforts to bring about political agreements. But the problem here is not so much the United States' absence or the failure of good intentions on the part of those trying to bring peace. The problem is that Haftar has been supported for the last 3-4 years by a number of foreign governments, which have provided him money in the form of counterfeit dinars, billions of dollars worth, produced by Russia's state printer, and in the form of military help. And as long as he's getting all of that, it's very hard to believe that he's going to change course from his goal of becoming dictator of Libya. I wish it were the case that the good intentions of the international community were sufficient, but it isn't. General Haftar has to have pressure put on him in terms of threats to cut him off be made real if he continues the conflict. As long as he chooses to continue the conflict as part of his effort to become a dictator, it's pretty much irrelevant what anyone else does.
Jamal Ghamati, I mean, is it the partners called on all outside parties to end their interference? Is that likely?
No, I think what has been missing throughout the Libya conflict over the last few years is one very crucial factor, and that is the real resolve and commitment from the international community to apply pressure on the proxies who fuel this war to actually stop fueling this war. We see a lot of nice statements, positive statements, but not followed by real action. As I said, there was a commitment yesterday to stop supplying the warring parties with arms and weapons and all sorts of things.
But even during those talks, Khalifa Haftar was conducting fresh wave of attacks on the outskirts of Tripoli.
Not only that, because he has never signed a ceasefire document until now, he can say, I'm not obliged to stop. And he violated it last night in 3 places in south of Tripoli. Today, we've monitored 2 cargo planes from Abu Dhabi to Benghazi. What are they bringing to Khalifa Haftar? We know what they are bringing. So all this nice talk in Berlin yesterday is not followed by action because the proxies are not willing to stop. I think Boris Johnson put it very well yesterday before he left for Berlin. He said what's going on in Libya is a proxy war, and these proxies should stop because the ones who are suffering are the Libyan people. And I think Jonathan Weiner on Twitter have said that these proxies who fuel the war will not stop until they name what is the price they want for stopping this war. And that's exactly what it is. Khalifa Haftar is merely a proxy, is merely a spearhead for the Emiratis, the Egyptians, the French, and so on. They want to install him as a dictator in Libya so that they can enjoy whatever interests they look forward to or benefits they want to have. They don't care about the Libyan people, their future, what the Libyan people themselves aspire to have, like a constitutional, democratic, civic state. That doesn't ring at all. In fact, the Emiratis are totally against democratization in the Arab world. And this premise, which is totally unfounded, that the Sarraj government is actually an Islamic fundamentalist government, is totally unfounded. This is rubbish. Sarraj has nothing to do with Islamic fundamentalism. Okay. Most of his ministers are not. And it's just used as a premise to justify this aggression.
Jonathan Weiner, I see you shaking your head. What do you want to say?
I don't think that Russia, the Emiratis, the Egyptians have the intention of trying to control Libya. I think that they certainly have had the intention of supporting Khalifa Haftar in his efforts to take over the country and become a dictator, and provides, from their point of view, stability and security, and for Russia, potentially access to a Mediterranean port. So they have geostrategic goals. Do I agree with those goals? I do not agree with those goals. Libyans need to be able to decide their future and decide on the course of their own country, and to have stability and security through democratic institutions, not through the imposition of the will of one man who told me all Libyan politicians were worthless. He would appoint military governors throughout the country, and have the politicians work on education and healthcare, and he would make all other decisions till he felt ready to return to the barracks at some future date. That's what he told me in 2016. He told me he was going to invade Tripoli back then. He ultimately went through with that once he secured enough support from overseas. That military and financial support needs to stop so that Libyans have a chance at a political settlement.
Marco, Libyans may want to have a chance for peace, but Sunday's communique, when you look at it, it was filled with goodwill and a lot of fluff, and whether it's energy or other geopolitical interests, aren't countries that are involved, the 12 countries that were invited, aren't they always going to look out for their national interest?
Yeah, in a way, the main point I would like to raise is one benchmark we should watch immediately in the following weeks, and if the ports in eastern Libya will be reopened, because that is clearly an attempt to put the government in Tripoli under a sort of strangulation, just freezing its main source of revenue. But my concern is that all the Libyan crisis could be taken hostage to a major issue that is unfolding in eastern Mediterranean. A new great game is unfolding in the area and is related, of course, to the exploitation of oil and gas reserves that have been discovered here and there. And the one main element we should take into account is the declaration by Libya and Turkey of an economic exclusive zone, and how this zone are going to overlap with Greece, Egypt, and with the plans that, according to Israel, Cyprus and Greece, should see a pipeline, the Eastern Med pipeline, bringing gas to Europe from that area. So I'm afraid that the problem are just at the beginning, and if the situation in Libya will be really sucked in such a big, great game, I don't see a rosy future for everybody, especially for the Libyans.
Rosy future for Turkey and Russia. Juma, because in an opinion piece you wrote the day before the Berlin conference, you said that Russia and Turkey have established themselves as the main power brokers in this conflict. Is that still the case a day after Berlin?
I think it is. And
Yes,
I need
they
to add
are.
as well that I think President Trump, through a few phone calls with President Erdogan, is happy with this role that Turkey is taking. I think Turkey has created a new dynamic, a new balance, which will protect the GNA, will protect Tripoli. It will make Egypt and the Emirati think twice and now about continuing with this futile, hopeless military campaign by supporting Haftar. I think the sooner they realize that they are actually gambling on a losing horse and that Haftar will never, ever take over Tripoli, the better for the Libyan people. It will save lives and it will stop the bloodshed. And hopefully the Egyptians and the Emiratis will come to their senses that they should let the Libyans decide what kind of country they will have in the future, and it's not decided in Abu Dhabi or Cairo.
Mohamed, Sarraj is a weak leader. He has little control over his forces. These are some of the words that have been said about the Prime Minister of the internationally recognized government. Do you think that Sarraj is the best candidate for the Government of National Accord or the GNA in this process to move forward?
First of all, we should not take the Government of National Accord's word that the truce or the ceasefire has been violated by Khalifa Haftar. Both sides have violated the truce on multiple occasions. So any attempt to paint this side or that side as the good side, or one as the angels and the other as the demons, is totally inaccurate, and we should be careful not to fall in that trap. With regards to Sarraj, I think he is a weak leader, and I think it's one of the reasons why he was chosen to head the Government of National Accord in the first place. He is an individual previously who has never had any strong opinions on whatever issue that faced Libya, as a politician, as a political activist, but also as a politician later on in 2014. And I think there are attempts now to actually replace him with someone who is much more stronger, like Fathi Bashagha, his Minister of Interior, who hails from the city of Misrata and does have the respect and the support of key segments within the city of Misrata. And I think there is also this understanding among some internationals that Sarraj is definitely not the figure or the person who is able to control the various factions that exist in the GNA coalition, and that a new candidate is needed for that purpose.
We weren't trying to make a distinction between bad side and good side, but the reality is that there are two sides to this conflict. All right, Jonathan Weiner, Mohamed Eljarh, Jamal Ghamati, and Marco Carnelos, thank you very much for joining us here on The Newsmaker. I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there.
The only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
That's all for this edition of The Newsmakers. Thanks for watching and see you next time.